Tonight, we're stepping into a story that was never meant to leave the cutting room floor. During filming of Expedition Bigfoot, lead investigator Mireya Mayor reportedly captured footage so disturbing that production was halted almost overnight. Memory cards were confiscated, files were locked down, and what was supposed to be just another night in the field turned into a silence that still hasn't been explained. Officially, the network called it a creative pause. Unofficially, insiders describe something far more serious: outside intervention, erased data, and a scientist who suddenly stopped speaking publicly. This isn't just about Bigfoot, and it isn't just about a TV show. It's about what happens when evidence crosses a line someone else has already drawn. Before we break down what was filmed, what vanished, and why this case may never be revisited on television, make sure you're subscribed, because once you hear how deep this goes, you'll understand why this story didn't disappear by accident. What happened during that Expedition Bigfoot shoot didn't begin with panic or chaos. It began quietly, the way most serious investigations do. Late at night, minimal movement, a sense that something was off long before anyone could explain why. The team had worked this terrain before: dense forest, uneven ground, heavy canopy. But that night felt different. Even experienced crew members commented on how the sound seemed muted, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Mireya Mayor was leading one of the units, focused, methodical, treating the night like any other data collection operation. Shortly after midnight, thermal readings began showing irregular movement patterns near the tree line. Not random heat signatures, not animals drifting in and out of range. These readings were deliberate: appearing, stopping, repositioning. Mireya initially assumed equipment interference or overlapping wildlife movement, but the patterns didn't match anything in her field experience. When the drone camera was adjusted and locked onto the clearing, the feed briefly stabilized, and then everyone froze. On screen was a tall, upright figure moving with balance and intent, not running, not charging, walking. Its heat signature was unusually intense, brighter than surrounding wildlife, yet oddly controlled. The figure paused near the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by trees, and turned its head toward the drone. That moment lasted only seconds, but it was enough. Enough for silence to fall across the monitoring tent. Enough for someone to whisper, "That's not supposed to be there." Then the feed dropped. No warning, no gradual signal loss. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. Static replaced video. Audio spiked, then cut entirely. When the systems rebooted, timestamps had jumped forward several minutes. No one remembered giving commands. No one recalled moving. The gap couldn't be explained. Mireya immediately ordered all local backups secured. She wanted the data preserved before anyone could touch it. That's when the first red flag appeared. The drone's onboard storage still held fragments of the encounter. Incomplete, distorted, but undeniably real. Enough to confirm the figure wasn't a visual artifact or misread thermal bloom. Within hours before sunrise, production leadership was contacted by higher-level executives. By midday, the tone had changed completely. What had started as a routine expedition was now being treated as a liability, not because it was fake, but because it wasn't. By morning, the atmosphere around the expedition had changed completely. What should have been a routine data review turned into closed-door conversations and unanswered questions. Mireya expected scientific scrutiny, verification. What she didn't expect was silence. Calls went unreturned. Messages were acknowledged without answers. And when production leadership finally spoke, it wasn't about the footage itself. It was about procedure. The first instruction came quietly: halt all filming until further notice. No explanation, no timeline, just stop. Equipment was powered down, drones grounded, and memory cards cataloged for temporary review. Mireya pushed back, insisting that any biological anomaly fell under her scientific jurisdiction. The response was short and unsettling. This was no longer an editorial decision. It was administrative. Less than 24 hours later, unfamiliar personnel arrived at the field base. They didn't wear network branding. They didn't introduce themselves as producers. They carried hard cases, clipboards, and spoke in precise, rehearsed language. Their request wasn't framed as optional. All recording media was to be surrendered immediately: drones, camera cards, audio logs, even personal backups. One crew member later said it felt less like a production pause and more like a controlled sweep. Mireya objected openly. She demanded to know who authorized the confiscation and where the data would be taken. One of the men responded without raising his voice: "This material is no longer cleared for broadcast or independent analysis." That sentence ended the discussion. From that moment on, nothing belonged to the team. By that evening, digital access began disappearing. Cloud folders were locked. Editing systems flagged errors. An audio engineer reported his laptop rebooting mid-session, returning with files missing and permissions revoked. Another crew member noticed timestamps altered on backups they hadn't touched. The data wasn't just being collected, it was being rewritten. Officially, the network would later describe the shutdown as a technical issue paired with creative reassessment, but those on site knew better. You don't erase footage this aggressively unless someone is afraid of what it shows. And as Mireya stood in a clearing that was now silent again, one truth became impossible to ignore. The investigation hadn't ended. It had been taken over. For a brief window of time, everyone believed the evidence was gone for good. The confiscated drives, the wiped systems, the locked folders, it all seemed airtight. Whatever had been captured that night had been swallowed by corporate silence. And yet, something survived. Not a full video. Not a clean backup, just a fragment that wasn't supposed to be there at all. Days after the shutdown, a former assistant editor, someone low enough in the hierarchy to be overlooked, discovered a cached still frame buried deep inside a temporary render folder. It hadn't been flagged, hadn't been encrypted, and hadn't been scrubbed during the purge. One single image, automatically generated during a background process before access was revoked. A digital ghost. The frame showed a clearing choked with fog, trees barely visible at the edges. In the center stood a tall, upright shape. Its proportions were wrong in a way that was immediately unsettling. The shoulders were too wide. The arms hung too long. The head sloped back at an angle that didn't match human anatomy, yet the stance was unmistakably bipedal. It wasn't caught mid-run or mid-attack. It was standing still, watching. What disturbed those who saw it most wasn't the shape itself. It was the posture. The figure wasn't reacting to the camera. It wasn't startled. Its head was slightly tilted, as if assessing the equipment observing it. As if it understood it was being watched and had chosen not to hide. The editor shared the frame privately with two trusted colleagues. Within hours, it had been copied, renamed, and passed along through encrypted messages. Then something strange happened. The file began disappearing from devices without being deleted. One recipient swore it vanished while he was looking at it. Another found the file name still present, but the data inside reduced to 0 bytes. It was as if the image was being hunted. When the frame briefly surfaced on a closed research forum, it lasted less than 10 minutes before being taken down by an automated copyright claim filed by a company no one recognized. Not the network, not the production company, a third party, one registered to a Virginia address tied to defense contracting offices. That was when the whispers changed. This wasn't damage control. This wasn't embarrassment. This was containment. And the single surviving frame became proof that what Mireya's team encountered wasn't a mistake. It was something, someone else already knew existed. After the frame vanished, attention quietly shifted to one person, Mireya Mayor herself. Not publicly, not in headlines, but behind closed doors. Interviews she had already agreed to were suddenly canceled. Academic appearances were postponed without explanation. Even colleagues who had known her for years noticed something was wrong. She stopped answering messages. Calls went to voicemail. Emails received polite, delayed replies that said nothing at all. To the public, it looked like a routine break. To those close to her, it felt forced. One production assistant later recalled that Mireya had confided in him days after the shutdown. She said she'd been warned, not threatened directly, but advised that discussing the footage could have serious consequences. Not professional consequences, legal ones, national ones. She was told the material fell outside normal scientific discovery and into a category she wasn't authorized to address. When she asked who made that determination, she was given no names, only an instruction: stop. Things escalated quickly. A scheduled university lecture on undiscovered primates was abruptly pulled from the calendar hours before it was set to begin. Event staff said 2 men had arrived early, requesting a private conversation with her. Witnesses described Mireya leaving the building with them, visibly shaken. The lecture never happened. No explanation was given. When she finally reappeared publicly, it was in a short, heavily edited network video. Calm lighting, neutral background, controlled tone. She stated that no verifiable evidence had been found and that the investigation had yielded inconclusive results. Viewers immediately noticed how unlike her it felt. Her cadence was stiff. Her eyes drifted off camera repeatedly. Audio specialists later noted faint compression artifacts suggesting the video had been altered before release. Behind the scenes, crew members said she was furious, not afraid. She believed the footage represented a genuine biological anomaly and deserved scientific review, but every path forward was blocked. Journals wouldn't respond. Conferences declined submissions. Even private discussions seemed to disappear before they started. The message was clear without being spoken. Mireya could continue her career, as long as she pretended that night never happened, and the fact that a respected scientist was silenced so efficiently told everyone else something terrifying. Whatever had stepped into that clearing wasn't just unknown, it was protected. After Mireya Mayer's silence became impossible to ignore, the rest of the Expedition Bigfoot team began to notice changes that went far beyond a canceled shoot. It wasn't just the footage that disappeared. The paper trail vanished with it. Call logs were missing. Emails referencing the incident returned error messages. Even internal production documents were quietly rewritten, removing entire dates from the schedule as if that expedition had never occurred. Crew members who tried to talk about the incident informally were warned to stop asking questions, not by executives they recognized, but by legal representatives they'd never interacted with before. New non-disclosure agreements were issued far stricter than anything previously signed. These didn't just restrict discussion of unaired content, they prohibited referencing field anomalies, third-party intervention, and external oversight. Language that had no place in a normal television contract. Then the personal incident started. One cameraman reported a break-in at his home. Nothing valuable was taken. No electronics, no cash. The only thing missing was a small external hard drive he used for off-site backups. A sound engineer received a late-night call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end didn't threaten him. It simply said, "You already gave us what we needed," and hung up. Another crew member claimed his editing laptop locked itself during a routine session, displaying a message that read, "Access revoked by administrator." At first, some tried to explain it away as paranoia, stress, coincidence, but the pattern was impossible to ignore. Everyone affected had been present during the night of the encounter. Everyone else was left alone. A small group of crew members decided to quietly compare notes, not over email, not over phones, in person. They met in a motel outside Portland under the excuse of a production debrief. What they discovered confirmed their worst fear. They weren't dealing with a network cleanup. They were dealing with coordinated suppression. Fragments of data still existed. Corrupted audio logs, partial telemetry, thermal readings that showed multiple large heat signatures circling the camp hours before the sighting. These weren't random movements. They flanked the team, advanced, with intent. That was the moment the crew understood the truth. Expedition Bigfoot hadn't crossed into dangerous territory by accident. They had walked into something that already had watchers, and those watchers were now watching them. When the remaining crew quietly began comparing what little data they still had, a disturbing picture started to form. This wasn't just about a single figure caught on thermal for a few seconds. The encounter was only the most visible moment in a pattern that had been building long before that night. Recovered telemetry from the drone showed repeated signal interference beginning hours earlier, not random static, not environmental noise. The interference appeared in timed bursts, always lasting the same duration, always occurring when the drone crossed specific points in the airspace. When one technician overlaid those interference points on a topographical map, something chilling emerged. The disruptions formed a loose perimeter around the team's camp, almost like a boundary. Thermal logs painted an even stranger picture. Multiple heat signatures appeared intermittently around the perimeter throughout the night. They didn't behave like animals. They didn't roam. They didn't chase prey. They moved in short, controlled paths, stopping and starting as if reacting to something unseen. At one point, 3 signatures converged near the tree line, merged into a single heat mass, then separated again minutes later. No known wildlife pattern matched that behavior. Audio fragments recovered from corrupted files revealed low-frequency pulses embedded beneath normal ambient sound. Most viewers would never notice them, but when isolated and slowed down, the pulses followed a precise rhythm. Every 13 seconds, repeating, consistent. Audio engineers noted that the frequency range didn't align with wind, insects, machinery, or known animal calls. It also didn't behave like random interference. It behaved like signaling. One technician made a connection that stopped the room cold. The pulse interval matched communication timing used in certain long-range tracking systems. Not civilian, military, experimental. That didn't mean the sound was man-made, but it suggested something operating with structure, not instinct. Even more unsettling was what happened when the team tried to reprocess the data. Files that should have been recoverable degraded further each time they were open, as if repeated access caused decay. One engineer described it as the data-resisting analysis. Whether that was a technical anomaly or something else, no one could say. By the end of that meeting, the crew reached an unspoken agreement. The footage wasn't erased because it was confusing. It was erased because it was coherent. It showed intent, awareness, and coordination. And whatever they encountered wasn't reacting like an animal being discovered. It was reacting like something that already knew it was being observed and allowed itself to be seen. By the time the crew finished assembling what little data remained, one reality had become impossible to ignore. There was no safe way forward, not scientifically, not legally, and not personally. Whatever Expedition Bigfoot had stumbled into wasn't something that could be revisited, debated, or slowly unpacked over future seasons. The cost of continuing had already become clear. Attempts to escalate the findings through proper scientific channels quietly failed. Emails to research institutions went unanswered. Informal conversations with colleagues ended abruptly once the topic was raised. One crew member later admitted that a longtime academic contact warned him off record to stop pursuing the material entirely. This isn't a discovery, he was told. It's a boundary. At the network level, the shift was just as stark. Show outlines that once encouraged deeper investigation were rewritten to remove anything resembling direct encounters. Language was softened. Stakes were reduced. The emphasis moved away from evidence and toward atmosphere, not because the producers wanted it that way, but because that was the only version still allowed to exist. Privately, some team members discussed walking away altogether. They had families, careers, lives that suddenly felt exposed. The realization that unknown parties could access personal devices, track movements, and erase data without explanation changed how everyone viewed their role. This wasn't about fear of ridicule, it was fear of attention. The most telling moment came when one crew member asked a simple question during a closed production call. If this isn't real, why are we being treated like it is? No one answered. The truth was never officially denied. It was simply made unreachable. And so the investigation didn't end with a conclusion. It ended with containment. The show continued, but the story didn't. Viewers never saw the moment that changed everything. Never heard the sounds buried beneath the audio. Never saw the frame that shouldn't exist. All that remained was absence, a gap in the narrative that felt heavier than any on-screen reveal. By choosing silence, the people in control made one thing clear. Whatever stepped into that clearing wasn't meant to be studied publicly. And the most unsettling possibility wasn't that it existed. It was that someone already knew it did. Long after filming stopped and the crew scattered, one question refused to die. Why Mireya Mayor? Of all the people involved, she was the one with the strongest scientific footing, the one most capable of contextualizing what had been seen. And yet, she was also the one who went silent the fastest. That silence wasn't empty. It was loaded. In private conversations with colleagues before cutting off contact, Mireya reportedly made one statement that never left the people who heard it. She didn't say they had found Bigfoot. She didn't say they had found a new species. She said, "What we saw doesn't fit the tree." In biology, the tree is everything. Taxonomy, evolution, lineage. If something doesn't fit, it means it didn't branch naturally from what came before. It means the framework breaks. That idea explains the reaction better than any cover story. A misidentified animal could be debated. A hoax could be dismissed. But something that behaves with coordination, signaling, awareness of surveillance, and physical traits that don't align with known evolutionary paths, that isn't folklore. That's a problem. Mireya understood that going public without absolute control of the narrative would invite ridicule at best and career destruction at worst. But what seemed to stop her wasn't fear of backlash. It was the realization that the evidence didn't belong to science anymore. Once federal contractors appeared, once data was seized under administrative authority, the matter shifted domains. From research to security, from curiosity to containment. One former associate claimed Mireya was offered a choice: continue her work, access funding, maintain credibility, or challenge the decision and lose everything. She chose survival, not silence. There's a difference. Silence implies consent. Survival implies pressure. In the months that followed, she redirected her focus to safer, established research. Publicly, she moved on. Privately, she stopped fieldwork involving remote forests entirely. She never corrected the official explanation, but she never fully endorsed it either. Sometimes, the loudest warning isn't spoken. It's when someone who spent their life chasing the unknown suddenly decides there are things that should not be followed again. Years have passed, but the absence left by that night still lingers. The missing footage was never recovered, the encounter was never acknowledged, and Expedition Bigfoot quietly moved on without ever explaining what changed. But silence doesn't erase impact, it preserves it. What makes this case unsettling isn't just the possibility that something unknown was filmed, it's the response, the speed, the precision, the authority with which evidence was removed and people were silenced. Those actions don't follow curiosity, they follow familiarity. If what Mireya Mayor's team encountered was harmless, it wouldn't require containment. If it was imaginary, it wouldn't demand erasure. And if it was misunderstood wildlife, it wouldn't trigger outside intervention at all. The most disturbing possibility is also the simplest. Whatever stepped into that clearing had been seen before, documented before, studied before, and carefully kept out of public reach. And that leaves one final question. Not about Bigfoot, not about television, but about us. If something like this can be hidden so completely, how much else have we already been taught not to see?